Good morning, church. It is good to be with you, and I want to say a special welcome to those that are joining us online this morning or on the radio through KTCU. We're glad that you are a part of the worshiping community of faith here at University Christian Church, wherever you are, and hope that you feel the sense of being a part of what God is doing in this place. So as you heard a moment ago, we're starting a new series today that we're calling Life Comes At You Fast, which is a title that I shamelessly stole from a nationwide insurance commercial a number of years ago. And that may be the case, but the truth is we know that to be true. Life does come at you fast. I was talking with a person in our congregation not too long ago, joking and teasing with him about an upcoming birthday, and he looked at me and he said, "Russ, I don't get it." He said, 2 days ago I was 21, next week I'll be 80. Life does indeed come at you fast. Back in 1977, John Claypool, who was the senior minister at the time of Broadway Baptist Church, not too far from here, just across town, wrote a book called Stages that was an overview of the spiritual journey through life. And one of the things that he pointed out is that each stage is unique, but there's also some similarities. There's also some patterns. He recounted those 4 different stages: childhood and adolescence, adulthood, and older adulthood. And he used as the topic, the theme that ran through that is the story of David. The story of David. So for the next several weeks, we will be doing the same thing, using the life of David as our guide to look at some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that exist in each of those stages, but also how we develop spiritually in those times. David is one of the few characters that we see in scriptures over the entirety of their life. From womb to tomb, you might say. Over 100 pages, in fact, are developed or dedicated detailing the life and the different phases and stages of David's life. Moses and Joseph are others that have that same lifespan, but they are a distant second and third in terms of the amount of time and attention that are given to them. So this morning we're going to start in 1 Samuel chapter 16 when David as a young boy is anointed by Samuel, a story that you'll hear in just a moment. But several years ago when I was working on my doctorate, I had the opportunity to study with Walter Brueggemann, who was at the time and still is, I would say, one of the preeminent Old Testament scholars, Hebrew scripture scholars of this generation, perhaps of any generation. And I remember in that class, one of the things that he said was this text, looking at 1 Samuel chapter 16, is one of the most important texts in all of the Old Testament. Just to recap the story just a little bit, Saul, the king at the time, turns out not to be a great king, and so Yahweh instructs the prophet Samuel, who was an important prophet at the time, to go to Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, and look for the next king. Now, Samuel's a little fearful of what Saul might do if he finds out, but nonetheless, these were directions from God, and so off he goes to Bethlehem. And he meets there with Jesse and explains what God has told him. Now, Jesse, as you will hear, has 10 kids and brings the oldest son, Eliab, to Samuel. Surely this will be the next king, he says. But that turns out not to be true. That's where we pick up the story this morning. 1 Samuel chapter 16.
Today's reading is from the book of 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 7 through 13. Here begins the reading. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at things that people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He is tending to the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from then on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah. Here ends the reading. The word of God for the people of God.
That was a great job, Marin. Some big names in that one. You did a great job. Thank you so much. So in all my years of ministry, almost 30 years of ministry, not once have I ever met someone who didn't want to do right by their children. Now, trusted, there are some, many, in fact, that don't always know how to go about that. And many of us have messed up along the way in our parenting journey. We have made mistakes and maybe even caused some damage. But all of us, I would argue, all of us desperately want to do right by our children. And I would argue that the same is said for the church. That we desperately want to do right by our children, by the ministry that we provide, by the message that we proclaim. We desperately want to do right by our children. We want to do our best. I want to begin this morning with a couple of observations. One is that oftentimes as parents, but also as a church, we tend to focus on the wrong thing. We worry about the wrong thing. Robert Fulghum once said, "Don't worry that your children never listen to you. Worry instead that they are always watching you." And we know that to be true. Don't worry that your children don't listen. Worry instead that they are watching everything that you do. The second thought comes from a teacher, a psychologist, a teacher of teachers by the name of Chaim Gano, who wrote a book a number of years ago called Between Parent and Child, who said that if you want your children to improve, let them overhear the things that you say about them to other people. Something fascinating, something I'd not thought of. If you want your children to improve, let them overhear the nice things that you say about them to other people. This morning, I want to identify a couple things that children need, that our young people need from both home but also from the church. The first is that they need to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are valued, that we take delight in them. Scott Peck wrote a book a number of years ago called The Road Less Traveled that at one point was the second largest best-selling book in the history of books, second only to the Bible. The Road Less Traveled, in it he says, the best thing that you can give your children is the awareness that they are valued, that they are loved, that they are adored, that they are capable. It makes for the greatest freedom in life. And he goes on to say, though, that if they don't get this in their home of origin, they will have a hard time getting it later in life. And chances are that they will look anywhere and everywhere in order to find that acceptance, that adoration, that love. They may look in therapy, but even then, it might take a lifetime for them to find that. That's how important valuing our children is. A couple of stories that I want to share with you this morning. The first is of a young boy, probably 9, 10 years old, who desperately wanted that affirmation from his father. But his father was not the type that would lavishly flow love upon his child. Was stoic, cold, you might even say. Showed no affirmation whatsoever, yet his son desperately wanted that. One night, his parents were having a dinner party, and there in the dining room, he sat at the top of the stairs, overhearing, listening to what the conversation was about. And at one point, he overheard his father talk about a boy that was dependable, responsible, always on time, could always count on him. Well, this boy, desperate for this affirmation, came running down the stairs and said, Dad, is it true? Do you feel that way about me? And his dad said, No, I'm talking about the paper boy. Go back upstairs, go to your room, he said. Another story about a young girl, about 12 years old. In the days before Christmas, she was given the title, the role of playing the angel in the Christmas pageant at her church. In the day of the pageant, she was dancing around the living room in a costume, angel wings flowing behind her. Now, what you need to know about this living room is that on the mantle there above the fireplace, there was this vase, this family heirloom that had been passed down from generation to generation. It was the family treasure. Well, at one point in all of her dancing, the wing of her angel costume accidentally knocked off the vase that came crashing to the floor. And immediately, panic filled this young girl. She knew the value of this vase. And so pretty soon her mom come running in, having heard the commotion, says, "What is it? What happened?" She said, "The vase. I broke the family treasure." Her mom scooped her up. She says, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Thank God you aren't hurt." Well, that little girl would grow up to be a writer, and later in life she would write, "That was the day. That was the day that I realized and learned that I was the family treasure." What our children need more than anything else is to know that they are valued, that we take delight in them, that they are the family treasure. Sam Keene had a chance to visit his dying father in the days before he died. And as an adult, he said to him, he says, "You know, Dad, you've always been there when any of us children have needed you. And across the years, you've given us the single best gift that any parent could give, and that is that you took delight in us. In all sorts of ways, you let us know that we were glad that you were here, that you were glad that we were here, that we had value in our eyes, that our presence was a joy and not a burden to you." You see, our young people need to know that they are valued, that they are cherished, that they are delighted in, that they are the family treasure. You know, the church, at its very best, is what I oftentimes refer to as a godly backup system. And I got to tell you that in this congregation, in this church, I have met some of the best parents I've ever met. The type of parent that I aspire to be, some of you with young children, and some of you with children who are now adults, but I aspire. And I would be willing to bet that all of those parents will tell you that they couldn't do their work alone, that they count on others in the church family to help along the way, to stand in when they can't. In fact, not only that, but studies show that the developing a healthy, well-balanced faith, the work of instilling value and affirmation, oftentimes comes from someone outside of the family that echoes and repeats the things that they have learned in their home, someone other than their natural parents who tells them and shows them that they're valued, that they're cherished. I have this thought from time to time about why parents might, in some way, shape, or form, seek to do their work without the backup system of the church. A number of years ago in my previous congregation, I had a sabbatical. I was away for the whole summer, and while I was away, my daughter Ella, who was about 9-10 years old at the time, developed an issue with her leg, a bone in her leg, and needed to have emergency surgery. Now, this was not life-threatening surgery, but as they often say, minor surgery is what happens to other people's children. But as you can imagine, Kelly and I, as her parents, were concerned, wrecked with worry. And what I remember in that moment is being disconnected from my church family. And I knew that they were praying for her, that they were praying for us, but yet I was disconnected from that family. And I remember thinking at the time, why would anyone want to do this work alone without the help of the church? Kelly and I could not do this work alone. And so we are thankful for all of you, for loving our kids, for standing in when we can't, for reminding our children that they're lovable, that they are capable. Think about God in that moment. Genesis, God creates the heavens and the earth, and it was not until the humans that it says God saw that it was good. In other words, God delighted in creation. And flip to the New Testament, we see again the baptism of Jesus. Jesus is baptized there in the River Jordan, and as he comes up out of the waters, he hears this voice, "This is my child, in whom I take delight." That's why University Christian Church in this place, every time your child goes to the nursery, every time you take your child to a Sunday school class, to vacation Bible school, to children's worship, to youth group, over and over, what they will hear, what they will see in the actions of our staff and our volunteers is that we take delight in you. You see, our job as parents, our job as a church, is to tell and to show our children that you are valued, that you are cherished, that you are delighted in. And the truth is, we simply cannot say that enough. The second thing that they need, both in home but also in church, is to be challenged but also encouraged. Claypool, who I mentioned a moment ago, speaks in his book about a Christmas tree spirit. I love this idea. He points out that children are like Christmas trees, and that they've got these gifts all around them, but also within them and in their nature and in their job. Their role is to unwrap and to discover those gifts, to develop those capacities. But then, to be encouraged to give those gifts away to a world that is in desperate need of only what they have. There's a fine line, though, isn't there? And I would argue that some of the greatest damage I've seen is not from a lack of love, but from too much pressure. That there's a fine line, that we oftentimes see too many parents put too much pressure on their kids, whether it's sports or music or academics. So the rub is trying to find that balance, to point out their gifts, to help them unwrap them, to discover them in a healthy way, a balanced way, to find a sense of balance between affirmation but also expectation, between possibilities and also responsibilities. That's what the story of David we heard a moment ago reminds us, that the discovery of those gifts is only half of the journey. Don't forget that David had 7 brothers, 2 sisters, all of them older, and all of them were passed over. This was not because of favoritism, but simply about gifts. All of them passed over. All of them gifted, but not chosen. You see, at the very moment of being specially chosen, this big responsibility comes upon David. Now, he was the youngest, but yet he was also entrusted with tending the family sheep, a big responsibility for the youngest. My point in this is this, that David wasn't given something. He had these gifts, and because of these gifts, something was expected of him. So how do we find that balance between affirmation and expectation, between possibility and responsibility? There's a fine line. Maya Angelou, incredible poet, amazing speaker, she had the opportunity one time to speak at a college commencement address. And she told the graduates at that moment, she said, "You have been the beneficiaries of the best that this society has to offer. That we have given you the best education that we know how to give. We have told you everything we know. And now," she said, "you owe us something." She wasn't talking about the school, she was talking about the world. You owe the world. You have been given the greatest gift. And then she would go on to say, quoting Jesus, "To the one to whom much is given, much will be expected." I know that Spider-Man also said that, but Jesus said it first. You see, young people need not to be pampered, but to be challenged. Challenged to give their gifts to those who need them most. That's why we take them on service learning trips like the trip that our young people left on this morning, to teach them that they have not just the ability to change the world, but the responsibility to transform the world by living out Christ's courageous love. My church, my home church, did that for me. And outside of my children, it has been the greatest gift that I have received in this lifetime. You see, David was blessed with acceptance, but also with expectation. Life comes at you fast. What our children need most from us is to know that they are valued, that they are loved, that they are cherished, that they are the recipient of the greatest gifts. And so as a church, as parents, let us not fail to tell our children, "You are my beloved child in whom I take delight." And if you can't say that, write it. And if you can't say it, if you can't write it, say it to someone else and let your children overhear it. You are a beloved child of God. And we can't wait to see where that love will lead you in life.